In the news, the U.S. relief effort continues in northern Iraq despite tension on both sides of the border. And in this country, Congress takes up a plan to bail out the fund that bails out troubled banks.
This is NBC News at sunrise.
Good morning, I'm Ann Curry. Iraqi troops are pulling back this morning away from the area in northern Iraq where U.S. troops are setting up camps for Kurdish refugees. But some Iraqis remain. U.S. Marines ran into a group of heavily armed Iraqi police over the weekend. The Iraqis retreated after a short but tense standoff. Meantime, on the other side of the border, inside Turkey, there's been growing tension and some fighting between refugees and Turkish soldiers. More on that from NBC's Margaret Larson.
For 2 weeks, there has been criticism of Turkish soldiers' aggressive behavior toward refugees in the camps. The soldiers say they must control the Kurds to prevent food riots. The refugees say it is simply brutality, the result of historical animosity between Kurds and Turks. Then yesterday at this camp near Jakurja in southern Turkey, the confrontations turned deadly. Turkish officials say the refugees attacked soldiers trying to distribute food and water. In the melee, the soldiers fired on the crowd, wounding 4 people and killing 1. Turkey's ambassador to Iraq believes such incidents are inevitable.
It's a pity, but if you put face-to-face 500,000 people and some soldiers for a long time, then frictions will start and
the shooting is likely to cause greater scrutiny of the Turkish army, including an investigation of one U.S. Marine report the Turkish soldiers seized an American helicopter drop and then demanded money from the refugees for the food. Margaret Larson, NBC News, Southern Turkey.
Secretary of State James Baker is taking a day off from his search for a Mideast peace to inspect the war damage in Kuwait. Baker will also talk with Kuwaiti officials about their go-slow approach to political reform. Tomorrow, Baker resumes his peace mission in Syria. 250,000 American soldiers remain in the Gulf, but the commander of Operation Desert Storm has come home. Thousands turned out in Tampa Sunday to welcome General Norman Schwarzkopf. The general has been flooded with offers, including a book contract, and has been mentioned as a potential political candidate. For now, though, Schwarzkopf, who plans to retire this summer, says he just wants to spend some time with his family. In this country, Congress this week begins considering a White House plan to shore up the federal fund that insures the nation's banks. As Chief Economic Correspondent Irving R. Levine reports, a growing number of banks are in trouble, and the fund that insures them is running out of money.
This week, FDIC Chairman William Seidman faces a barrage of criticism from lawmakers for an administration rescue scheme he presented to Congress. The fund would borrow $45 billion from the U.S. Treasury and then use that same borrowed money as collateral to borrow more money.
What the FDIC wants to do is like my going to one bank, borrowing $5,000, and going to the second bank and using the $5,000 as collateral to borrow another $45,000.
At some point, guess who gets stuck with the bill?
Anybody who says the taxpayers aren't going to pay on this issue is deluding the public.
Critics say that the White House plan to replenish the insurance fund simply delays the day when taxpayers get the bill. Delays it, they say, until the 1992 election is safely out of the way. Irving R. Levine, NBC News, Washington.
In Washington State, 21,000 teachers are still walking picket lines this morning. Money is a big issue, but it is not the only issue in the dispute, as Jim Foreman of KING-TV reports.
The teachers are striking for more money, but they say they're also striking for a bigger share of the state budget to reduce class size, build new schools, and buy new books and supplies. So instead of preparing lesson plans, thousands of striking teachers spent their weekend rallying on the steps of the state capitol. This group of 5 suburban Seattle teachers is on a 3-day walk to the legislature.
And each year we stay where we're at, we're getting 10 years behind, and that has to change in order for our children to grow up in the world of which they have to deal with.
The marching teachers say Washington is just one example of our nation's crumbling public schools, and they warn if they win here, there could be more strikes in more states.
I'm just saddened that we spend way too much money on bombs and not nearly enough money on education, because I really feel that, you know, if we can catch these kids early and in a classroom where there's 18 kids instead of 30 kids, you can make all the difference in the world.
So this morning, as another 300,000 Washington State students face another week of no school, their teachers and the lawmakers they're striking against still have no talks planned to end the strike. Jim Foreman for NBC News, Olympia, Washington.
The weather looks doubtful, but NASA is going ahead with preparations for tomorrow's scheduled launch of the shuttle Discovery. Right now, meteorologists say there's only a 40% chance the shuttle will lift off on time. During the 8-day mission, the Discovery will test an array of Star Wars instruments for the Pentagon. The national forecast and a check of Wall Street after this. Stock prices close out a frantic week with a sharp loss on Friday. The Dow Jones Industrials dropped about 34 points. Looking ahead to today's market day, here's the Wall Street Journal's Doug Cease. Good morning.
Hi, Ann.
Well, the Dow broke 3,000 last week. I'm wondering, and then fell sharply. What went wrong?
Well, I think what happened is it's a lot like a mountain climber. He gets to the top of the mountain. He enjoys the view, but he's got to come down for lack of oxygen. I think what happened here is that there's no evidence the economy is turning around. We've got to have that if things are going to stay above 3,000.
Is there anything that's happening this week that could get investors charged up again?
Well, you might see durables goods report tomorrow comes out. It might show us that the economy at least has bottomed out. It might even show a little bit of a turn up. That would help. And some good earnings reports would help a lot. Whether we get those remains to be seen.
What does the market really need to feel good about the idea that
I think what we really need to see is industrial production coming back. We need to see the employment level beginning to climb again instead of losing jobs. Those are the kinds of things that the market is going to be looking for now to get above 3,000 and stay above 3,000.
Thank you so much, Doug, for being with us this morning. Well, time now for the weather with Joe Whitty. Good morning, Joe.
Good morning, Ann. A little stormy in parts of the southern plains states today. Some strong thunderstorms. In fact, we have a thunderstorm watch-up for the northeastern corner of Texas and Oklahoma, stretching into Louisiana. So keep weather eye there. That watch is valid until 8 a.m. Central Daylight Time. Rain showers up and down the Mississippi River Valley and some strong thunderstorms for parts of the southeast. There's still stormy situation in the northeast, though. Even a little bit of touch of snow for some of the mountains way up the Adirondacks and even as far south as West Virginia. That is my national weather. Now here's what's happening in your neighborhood.
Well, we're going to try and keep the rain away for a day or two. By Wednesday, we do have rain showers in the forecast. Partly sunny today, high of 59. Then for tonight, mostly cloudy. Overnight low of 40 with a northwest wind, 8 to 17 miles an hour.
And in just a few more minutes, a look at the weather trends for this week.
All right. Thanks, Joe. We'll see you then. Coming up, the Rocket goes to Canada as the NFL begins its college draft. The sports report is next when we come back. Doctors in Los Angeles say former football star Lyle ALZADO is back home this morning after being hospitalized briefly this weekend. ALZADO, who has inoperable brain cancer, suffered a seizure on Saturday. He's receiving chemotherapy and radiation treatment. In sports, the Rocket blasted off for Canada and sent shockwaves throughout the football world. On the day he was supposed to be the #1 pick in the NFL draft, Raheem Rocket Ismail explained why he signed a $26 million contract with the Toronto Argonauts.
I felt in my heart very comfortable, and it was kind of like a at peace kind of thing, and that really just played a major role.
Meanwhile, the Cowboys used the #1 pick to take Russell Maryland, a defensive lineman from Miami. The top 6 selections in the draft were defensive players. In baseball, the Pittsburgh Pirates scored 6 runs in the bottom of the 11th to beat the Cubs, 13-12. Chicago wasted a grand slam by Andre Dawson in the top of the inning. Elsewhere, it was the Mets over Montreal. Philadelphia fell to St. Louis in 10 innings. Ramon Martinez pitched a 5-hitter for the Dodgers. Steve Decker's homer in the bottom of the 9th powered the Giants past Houston. Atlanta edged Cincinnati. In the American League, the White Sox rallied for 2 runs in the bottom of the 9th to defeat Detroit. Lance Johnson's RBI single gave Chicago its first win in the new Comiskey Park. Seattle completed a 3-game sweep of Oakland. The Twins took California. Robin Yount's 3-run homer in the 10th boosted the Brewers past Toronto. 3 other games were rained out. In the Stanley Cup playoffs, Ken Hodges' goal with 1:21 left gave Boston a 3-2 victory over Montreal. Pittsburgh beat Washington 3-1. so both the Bruins and Penguins lead their series 2-1. The NBA's regular season ended last night, and the San Antonio Spurs took the Midwest Division title from Utah. The playoffs begin on Thursday, and that's sports. Well, Doris Eaton Travis is a gracious winner. After being honored as the University of Oklahoma's top history student, Ms. Travis admitted that she has an advantage over her fellow students. She's 87 and says she's lived through most of the history she's been studying. Well, the news continues in just a moment. You're watching NBC News at sunrise. Stories we're following this Monday morning on NBC News at sunrise. Iraqi troops make way for Allied refugee camps, a new conservative challenge to Gorbachev, and taxpayers pay top prices for SUNUNU's air travel. Details just ahead. It's been a full year now since commercial TV in the form of a program called Channel 1 came to the classroom. NBC's George Lewis takes another look at the continuing controversy.
Leading the news.
Meanwhile, Iraqi troops have been routing another group of Muslim rebels.
It's hip, it's slick, it's aimed at getting the MTV and video game generation turned on to what's happening in the real world.
I have seen through my own children that their interest is often provoked by things they see on television. If you can't get them in the tent on whatever the issue is, they're not going to read about it.
So, in more than 6,000 schools across the country, students who wouldn't ordinarily think about picking up a newspaper or watching a TV newscast are required to watch Channel 1. But there's more to it than that. The daily 12-minute newscast contains 2 minutes of commercials, and that has some critics up in arms.
What are we doing in a world where the papers every day talk about how poor children are? Where do we get the nerve to tell them what to spend their money on, embedded in the curriculum, when we know they're going to have to keep watching it?
Schools that sign up for Channel 1 get a $50,000 package of TV equipment, including a satellite dish, VCRs, and monitors for classrooms. But in California, the state superintendent of public instruction called it a bad deal and ordered schools not to subscribe to Channel 1.
The kids are entrusted to schools. The parents entrust the youngsters to schools. I don't think it's our right to turn around and then sell access to them for commercial profit, even if the schools can use some of that money.
Overfelt High in San Jose defied the superintendent's order and became the first Channel 1 subscriber in California.
We learned from Channel 1 that the
Ron Cueva, an economics teacher there, finds the newscasts valuable and says that the free TV equipment is a boon to schools that are strapped for cash.
We're the ones that have to do without because the bureaucrats want to have these high principles. You know, they don't have to run next door to borrow a piece of chalk because we're out.
The wrangle over Channel 1 goes on nationwide. Legislatures in New York and Rhode Island barred schools from using the program. The North Carolina Supreme Court ruled in favor of Channel 1 after state school officials tried to prevent local districts from signing up. The kids in San Jose tend to give Channel 1 high marks. Many say they're too busy with after-school activities and homework to watch regular newscasts.
All right, write down number 1, King.
In a classroom that uses Channel 1, I gave a pop quiz, asking 10th graders to identify some people and places in the news.
Baghdad.
The results were mixed. Question, who is Saddam Hussein? 92% of the students correctly answered President of Iraq. But when asked, who are the Kurds, only 44% got it right. Teachers say students best remember those things that are repeated over and over on the newscast, like Saddam's name, or, as the critics would point out, the names of all those sponsors that pay for the program. George Lewis, NBC News, San Jose, California.
We'll have more news, Fortune Magazine's John Curran on business, and Joe Whitty's weather when we return. Topping our news this morning, Iraqi troops make room for refugee camps. Iraqi forces have begun withdrawing from a turbulent region in northern Iraq. It's the area where American units are setting up camps to house hundreds of thousands of Iraqi refugees. And U.S. and its allies have demanded the Iraqi pullout. Soviet conservatives are launching a new challenge to Mikhail Gorbachev, with the USSR's ethnic and economic troubles getting worse and worse. Bob Abernathy reports from Moscow.
Soviet legislators today consider Mikhail Gorbachev's latest proposals for dealing with this country's worsening economic crisis, as Gorbachev himself is under growing attack from right and left.
This will be one of the hardest weeks for Gorbachev in 6 years.
Gorbachev returned over the weekend from a less than triumphal visit to Japan and Korea to face a key meeting tomorrow on his controversial plan to try to hold the Soviet Union together, and a meeting of top Communist Party officials Wednesday to review Gorbachev's work. Meanwhile, hardliners are trying to force a special meeting of the National Congress, which has the power to oust Gorbachev as president. And the coal miners' strike is now in its 8th week against bad economic conditions and Gorbachev's rule. With the same objectives, one-day general strikes have been called in some areas for tomorrow and Friday. Bob Abernathy, NBC News, Moscow.
Secretary of State Baker's Mideast travels take him to Kuwait today. It's his second post-war visit to Kuwait, and it's a change of pace from Baker's efforts to make peace between Israel and its Arab neighbors. Baker insists the U.S. is not pressuring Israel to make concessions.
We understand that it takes some time to consider the suggestions that we've made. We are quite confident that the government of Israel is doing that, and that in due course we will hear back from them.
The Israelis have still offered Baker no commitments on key matters concerning a peace conference. Egypt's President Hosni Mubarak has given Baker a firm pledge to attend the conference, but Saudi Arabia will not be there. Americans are paying unusually high prices for air travel, not for themselves, but for White House Chief of Staff John SUNUNU. SUNUNU's use of Air Force jets has cost the taxpayers more than $500,000, and it's touched off a partisan debate.
Nobody ever intended, for instance, for the U.S. military to be running some kind of taxpayer-subsidized frequent flyer program for the White House.
I can just tell you that this Chief of Staff has worked his heart out for the President. He's loyal, he's a good public servant, and he knows what is right and what is wrong, and I don't think he did anything wrong.
SUNUNU has reimbursed the government for the cost of commercial flights, but it's only a small percentage of the real cost. Democrats are calling for a probe by the General Accounting Office. Today is Earth Day, but organizers took advantage of the weekend to schedule most of this year's observances. There was an environmental fair in New Orleans. Trees were planted in Denver. And celebrities were on the march in California. Organizers say the Earth has taken a beating during the last 12 months.
The ozone depletion problem that we learned about several years ago, we just found out 2 months ago that in fact it's much worse than we thought. 1990 was the warmest year on record, so the global warming problem is clearly still around. Toxic chemicals, we're producing more and more every year. More oil spills in more places. So the environmental problems are in fact getting worse.
On the plus side, more than half of all Americans now say they recycle at least part of their garbage. Congress passed the Clean Air Act, and tough new laws are forcing the phasing out of single-hulled oil tankers. When we return, Fortune magazine's John Curran on the rise of the Dow, and Joe Whitty with the travel weather.
Today's business report is brought to you by Ramada Hotels, Inns, and Resorts.
Now that the Dow Jones Industrial Average has hit the 3,000 mark and retreated, how long will it be before it hits 4,000? Joining us now, as he does each Monday, is Fortune magazine's senior editor, John Curran. Good morning, John.
Good morning.
So when's it going to happen?
Well, the 3,000 barrier was an easy one to get through. What was keeping people back from that was basically a psychology, investor psychology, fear of the 3,000 mark. As we look ahead, we have more substantive barriers to deal with. I think the thing you have to look at is how good the market did in the 80s. Stocks went up 17% a year in the 80s, or returned 17% a year on average to investors. Whenever you have that terrific a return over a certain decade, the next decade tends to be pretty flat. I think we're going to see that in the 90s.
So what year do you think it's going to be?
Well, if the market just goes up, it's actually not as far off as you might think. If the market just goes up 5% a year, which would be pretty tame by most standards, especially in comparison to the 80s, we'll hit 4,000 in the mid-90s, say 1996, so it's closer than you think.
And is it smooth sailing from here until then?
Well, I think we'll hit 4,000, but I don't think we'll be enjoying smooth sailing. I think the problem we've had with this recession is that it has not been a classic recession where we had too many goods on the shelves, too much inventory. The reason for this recession was too much debt in the real estate sector, in the consumer sector, and in the corporate sector, and that's still going to be with us coming out of this recession, so I think we're going to be bobbing in and out of recession in the 90s more frequently than in the past.
And what kind of stocks are good to buy in this environment?
Well, stay away from consumer stocks because the consumer is tapped out. They have no money left to spend. Go with companies that supply other companies with the things they need to compete. That's computers, factory parts, that type of thing. I'd be looking at capital goods companies like GE, IBM, those types of companies.
Right. And are there any stocks that should be avoided?
Well, I would stay away from the drug stocks. They're very popular now, but I think healthcare costs are going to be a big issue in the 90s, and drug company profits could come under big pressure.
All right. Thanks a lot, John, for coming in this morning. Well, Joe Whitty is standing by to tell us some more about the weather. Joe.
Thank you, Ann. We're tracking two storm systems. One was a very wet soaker for the Northeast over the weekend. That is now winding over New England, bringing some very blustery winds and some snows. Second storm system is coming out of the Southern Plains system, bringing some strong thunderstorms this morning. So expect some airport delays down around Louisiana and Arkansas. There's the gusty wind situation with snows as far south as the mountains of Maryland and Virginia. Out west, some scattered showers across California into Nevada, Pacific Northwest in great shape. Seattle going up to 60, and we'll see 68 degrees for a high in Los Angeles by the afternoon. How about for the week ahead? Cooler than normal out in the west and cooler than normal in the east with warm temperatures in the Great Plains states, and it looks like by the end of the week, a major storm system moving out of the Rockies into the plains. That's the latest. Have a safe trip. Ann?
Thanks a lot, Joe. And finally, officials in the Atlanta suburb of Kennesaw, Georgia, are a bit red-faced. They admit they may have been a bit too eager for their town to be the first to name a street after General Norman Schwarzkopf. When they unveiled a street sign this weekend, they discovered they'd misspelled the general's last name. Well, that's NBC News at Sunrise this Monday morning. I'm Ann Curry. Happy Earth Day.